If you're struggling with the knowledge of prominent aesthetic principles used by major cultures in evaluating the arts competency on the FTCE Humanities K-12 exam, code 022. Hi, I'm Dani, a certified teacher and test prep expert with Study.com. Today, we'll be going over questions around aesthetic principles across various eras and cultures, and how these principles are expressed in different art forms. So, are you ready to get started? Let's go! Which of the following characteristics in the poetry of the English Romantic period best exemplifies the era's aesthetic principle of reverence for nature? A. Emphasis on the scientific study of natural phenomena. The Romantic arts period was actually a counter to scientific studies. B. Depictions of nature as a chaotic and dangerous force. That doesn't show reverence for nature. C. Portrayal of nature as a source of inspiration and spiritual renewal. This is what the English Romantic period of art was all about, and it also exemplifies the reverence for nature. Let's look at the last option, D. Focus on urban landscapes and industrialization. If we want the characteristic that exemplifies the reverence for nature, we're not looking for a focus on urban landscapes and industrialization. C is the correct answer, as the portrayal of nature as a source of inspiration and spiritual renewal does best exemplify the aesthetic principle of reverence for nature. Problem 2. Which of the following aesthetic principles is most characteristic of Renaissance art? The first option, A, says emphasis on abstraction and non-representational forms. Instead of being characteristic of Renaissance art, that's more characteristic of modern art. B, focus on religious themes with flat, two-dimensional figures. Two-dimensional is not an aesthetic principle of Renaissance art, but instead goes further back to medieval art. C, depiction of everyday life with a focus on spontaneity and movement. This is also not a characteristic principle of Renaissance art. D, use of perspective to create depth and realism in human figures. Renaissance art is characterized by the use of linear perspective to create a sense of depth and realism, particularly in the depiction of human figures. This principle reflects the Renaissance focus on humanism, scientific observation, and the revival of classical ideas. Our third problem asks, which of the following features of African tribal masks best demonstrates their aesthetic principle of embodying spiritual and ancestral forces? A. Abstract forms that symbolize spiritual and ancestral forces. This option does sound really on point with a feature that demonstrates that principle. B. Realistic representations of human faces. That's not necessarily a feature of the African tribal masks, and it doesn't necessarily embody spiritual and ancestral forces to show the realistic representation of the human face. C. Symmetrical and balanced designs for decorative purposes. If African tribal masks are meant to embody spiritual and ancestral forces, they have more than just decorative purposes. D. Bright colors used solely for aesthetic appeal. Similar to the previous choice, aesthetic appeal is not the main purpose for the African tribal masks. African tribal masks often use abstract forms to symbolize spiritual and ancestral forces, reflecting the belief that these masks are not merely decorative, but serve as conduits for spiritual power and communication with ancestors. A is our correct choice. Our last problem says, which of the following aesthetic principles is most central to the traditional Chinese landscape painting? A. Emphasis on detailed, realistic depictions of human figures. Realistic depictions of human figures aren't central to landscape paintings. B. The use of bright colors and bold contrast to convey emotion. Conveying emotion isn't one of the main priorities of traditional Chinese landscape painting, and we don't see a lot of bright colors and bold contrasts in the style either. C. The portrayal of nature as a harmonious and spiritual force. This option is a principle central to traditional Chinese landscape painting. Let's look at our last option just to be sure. Focus on urban scenes and industrialization. Urban scenes and industrialization aren't a principle that will be central to landscape paintings, which will focus more on nature. Traditional Chinese landscape painting emphasizes the portrayal of nature as a harmonious and spiritual force, reflecting the cultural values of Taoism and Confucianism, where nature is seen as a source of wisdom and tranquility. So C is the correct choice. Those are a few examples of the types of humanities questions you'll see. For more practice, check out our FTCE Humanities K-12 022 playlist. And for even more detailed practice, strategies, and customizable study materials, head over to study.com and check out our FTCE Humanities K-12 test prep course. Those who use study.com boast a 92% pass rate. Our courses include full-length exams, hundreds of authentic practice questions, and short, targeted video lessons specifically developed based on the latest test updates. With our resources, you'll know exactly what to expect on test day. Like this video and subscribe to this channel to get all the latest FTCE test updates. Thanks for watching! Happy studying!